So I do know that a lot of people will disagree when I say something like Stax is dead. What is this guy even talking about? So to be more clear and specific, what I'm specifically talking about is the mid-range Stax cEDH decks. Those are the ones that are basically dead, for two simple reasons. The first one, the speed of the format, a very important factor. The second, a healthy, diverse format hurts mid-range Stax decks. How? Isn't mid-range Stax supposed to be in the cycle of healthy, diverse format things? Well, let me show you why. This is the Grixis shell. This is something of the strongest concepts you can do inside Magic. You run some of the strongest black cards. In variations, you don't play all these together all the time, but some variations of Odd Nasp here and Bola Citadel, usually fastest Brain Freeze, and Breach and Dockside. Dockside is like in every deck more or less. Now, if everyone is doing this, then it's actually really easy to stack this out. All you need to do is basically get something like a Thalia in play. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Gonna be really hard to storm off with that Underworld Breach or Ad Nauseam. Now, Thalia is just an example. We have things like Trin Sphere, Deafening Silence, Dampening Sphere, a really cool one. And Collector Roof also does a good job in general, usually. But there's a problem. You build your Stax deck in order to deal with this, and then suddenly these guys show up, playing Monogreen Marvin. And the cEDH format have become really diverse. We talked about that before. Mono green suddenly capable of winning turn 2 in various ways, or, well, something of a turbo game plan, so to say at the very least. A commander like Slicer really like when you're staxing the game out, because Slicer doesn't really care. And these days you can even build Citadel stuff, but also some very turbo combo games with as well. This means that your Thalia that was suddenly gonna do a lot versus these Grixis decks, well, it is doing a lot versus those, is suddenly useless when you're running up against Mono Green, because Mono Green is just casting creature spells. They don't care about that non-creature tax at all. But that's fine, we have other cards inside the deck that could hurt the Mono Green deck in general. All we need to do is just get one Thalia into play to slow down the Turbo Grixis deck, and then we get to get something into play that will slow down the Mono Green thing, and there are Hate Bears and Stax effects that will slow down Marvin as well. There's just that very big problem. I think you can see what I say there. This deck can win turn 2. The number one problem was the speed of the format in combination of the diverse the format is. When you're building Stax decks, you're usually building something of a meta deck, a deck that is going to attack something very specific. But if the metagame is very diverse, if there are so many different things that are able to combo through in various ways, then it's just too hard to actually figure out how you're going to deal with everything. Because in the end, Stax cards are usually very selective, they target a specific thing. Counterspells don't. A Force of Will can counter anything. I guess I actually should mention that there is a similarity in counterspells as well. Force of Negation will only counter a non-creature spell, so their counterspells can also be very selective, but in general they are a little bit more universal. But part where how fast this format is means that you don't really have time to establish enough Stax pieces to gridlock all of your opponents out of the game. What basically Stax needs to achieve is, number 1, slow down all opponents. We aren't really capable of doing that, as I've kinda tried to showcase. And the second thing Stax needs to do is get an advantage. If you're just gridlocking everyone and you're not really accumulating any form of value during the gridlock, then you're just sitting in the same boat as everyone, basically in top decking mode. So you need to basically achieve 3 things here. I'm just putting up 2 here, but in this case, because of the speed of the format, you need to, or actually, because of the diverse the format, you need to achieve the first one, slow down all opponents, basically twice or 3 times. If you're going up against 3 decks that needs 3 specific Stax cards to be attacked, then that is just too hard. You're demanding so much from your mulligan that it's not really gonna be that easy to achieve, and then you aren't achieving step number 2, getting an advantage compared to everyone else. So ultimately, you're kinda kingmaking here, because you're attacking one with some of your stack pieces that is effective against that person, and everyone else just get a free pass to do whatever they want, because you aren't able to select an attack on that person. And if you put something like a dampening sphere into play, there's a chance that the person who's actually affected by the dampening sphere will just use a force of negation on it. Stax has to ultimately attack all opponents to basically be effective in general, or worth having inside your deck, preferably without hurting you as well. So is Stax dead? No. But think of it differently. Opposition Agent is a card I've talked about a lot. It's a card I really want to see more versions of in different variations from Wizard of the Coast. It is a very universal Stax effect that is attacking Surge, but also it's giving you value at the same time. You're being rewarded by using it. But it's also very hard to find a deck that in general doesn't search its library, so it's going to do something against, once again, usually all opponents. Not every time, but usually. Draenei Magistrate will attack commander-centric orientated decks. That's good, that's a lot of them. But the decks that aren't on a commander-centric orientated focus, where they don't really care about their commander, are usually on Breach or other tricks that are casting things from outside of the game, and then Draenei Magistrate kinda attack both worlds here. Now, I don't actually think that Yasharn qualifies as my example here, but in my experience, I've kind of found that Yasharn is attacking every little deck out there in a small form of way. I find it to be quite universal, even though it probably isn't. I kind of just want to mention it because I actually think it's really good, and it does something against like everyone, but it's not super universal actually. I guess we should mention Hullbreacher. It's banned, but it would be great because everyone is drawing cards. It's very hard to find someone that isn't like drawing cards in this format currently. But that's it. That's kind of the problem. If you're going to make a Stax deck that is like going to attack everyone, then these are your cards. Which means that you can't really create a Stax mid-range deck because you don't really have enough cards to do that. However, instead of building a Stax deck, you could build Turbo. Like I talked about before, even cEDH is moving more and more over towards a turbo-orientated commander strategy instead of a Stax mid-range commander strategy. Well, some people have always kind of been in a turbo kind of cEDH strategy, but it's becoming easier and easier with more cards that are being included in here, so to say. Power creep is helping out quite a lot for cEDH. And if you want to take a look at this deck list and this strategy, there's a link up there in the corner. However, there actually is one more Stax card, or well, it's actually not really a Stax card, but there's one more card that is like the ring to rule them all, so to say. Rhystic Study, yeah! Or, well, Mystic Remora and Esper Sentinel as well, of course. We actually have more cards we could give a shout out to as well. For example, Compost. Whenever a black card is put into one of your opponent's graveyards, you may draw a card. Not as good, but a worthy mention of the concept at the very least. You see, when you're drawing cards with a Rhystic Study, or one of these cards here in general, or a Crom, or Ledger Shredder actually just draws in the cards, but when you're accumulating value in mass card draw effects, then you're drawing into interaction, like the universal or very selective, but it doesn't really matter. As long as you're drawing into interaction, they can be as selective as you want, they're still going to do the job in some form of way with a superior hand size and a 0 to cast cards. Even cards like Mindbreak Trap are starting to become really interesting, because these days people are usually casting more than one spell. And I even think Commandeer could be a worthy mention as well, because if you have a really big hand size, because you have that Rhystic Study or Fish or Esper or that other huge value in play, Commandeer is actually free to cast. And you actually gain control of the non-creature spell. It's not a counter spell, but you're gaining control of the counter spell, so it's kind of a counter spell, but also with some potential value to it as well. But we have so many free to cast interactive spells in this format. So just by gaining a random pile of cards towards your hand, suddenly you're able to interact here and there across the entire battlefield. But you're also drawing into your win con, whatever win con you could possibly be going for. But ultimately, whatever deck that just grabs half of its current deck will figure out a way to win somehow. So these cards are both interaction versus your opponents in the form of like gaining value when they're doing things, and other cards in this similar concept as well, because they aren't really threatening the win, so to say. If someone casts Adnos, that is demanding interaction. If someone is casting a Rhystic Study or one of these things, it's not like demanding interaction or response at the very moment, yet. Eventually these cards will be capable of drawing cards, kinda depending on the pod in general, but kinda equally towards what an Adnos could potentially do sometimes. So what is the takeaway of this video? The cEDH format is really fast, you need to adapt. Stax isn't universal enough. You don't have time to develop all the Stax cards you need to slow down all of your opponents. And the cEDH format is too diverse, too healthy, and have too many different variations of turbo combo game plan strategies that it's too hard to find something that will gridlock everything. There are a few Stax cards that could actually do the job, and I do recommend them in various decks of yours when you're going for a mid-range plan, but they can't be your main strategy. You can't rely on a Stax game plan to slow down and build you towards an advantage. Because there's always going to be one turbo combo deck in your pod that is going to squeeze through and ignore whatever Stax card you're putting into play early in the game. And instead, more or less, value is the new Stax. Value engines that are giving you card draw, giving you interaction so you can interact universally, because if you just get a lot of cards in your hand, it doesn't matter if your interaction is very single target and selective, because if you have so many cards in your hand, you're going to have cards that are going to be able to interact with everything here and there, and a lot of cards are free to cast, so it doesn't matter if you're tapping out for your value engine and passing turn, you will still be able to draw into interaction and interact here and there depending on what you need to do. But this also gives you a game plan to build towards, because the value engine will also find your combo eventually, regardless of whatever combo that could potentially be. But some value engines should actually be mentioned here. You see, all value engines aren't equal. Dark Confidant is considered a really strong card, and I've seen a lot of games in cEDH in general here and there. But there's a problem. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get value from it. You don't have that many upkeeps anymore. I would like to say that cEDH is a turn 2 format. This means that a lot of value engines are limited. Like a Dark Confidant will never really have enough turns to accumulate value for it. If you're just getting one Dark Confidant trigger, it was basically just a cantrip. A Compost, even though I don't think this is like that great, but Compost could get a lot of triggers on just one turn, depending on how much black cards are being put into the graveyard. I'm showcasing Compost here basically to inspire you and see a little bit outside of the box. Like, there are more cards than Rhystic Study, even though Rhystic Study is like the big one, the go-to one. But there are more variants than this. Weaker and different, depending on. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video and got inspired in any form of way and learned a few new things. And if you liked this video, you might like that one as well, where I talk a little bit about the cEDH metagame and mention a few things I've talked about here on this video as well. Take care guys, and I see you in the next video.